You could be a person from the streets. You could be, shooting street photography. You could be using the street as a means to, traverse over with a vehicle. You could be, unhoused people live there. So it's like all these different sort of like values that street has, and even like, thinking about it in a way that like this, when you lay that asphalt down, right, or concrete or whatever, when you lay that down, that's that transformation from like natural space into urban space.
Welcome to What's My Thesis? I am your host, Javier Proenza. Every week, my guests and I share the answers we found to the questions we have. Join us as we explore and expand our worldview and ask, what's my thesis? And today, my guest is Hiroshi Clark. And I am obviously excited to have you because we've had to reschedule a couple times on my account. It's a crazy thing to decide to do a podcast every week. I'm not like, I love starting the show just feeling sorry for myself, but I'm definitely feeling that way today. I'm like sweating. I just got out of work. So I'm excited to talk though, because it definitely deep compresses me immediately. Like if I just came home and didn't have a conversation like the one we're about to have, I would just be like, so
I get that.
Anyway, man, so you're in LA, right? Or
I am, yes.
Adjacent? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I live in South Pasadena. Yeah.
In South Pasadena. Okay. And you grew up around here, or are you originally from somewhere else?
I grew up outside of LA. I grew up in Corona, California, which is in Riverside County. Yeah, okay. About 60, 70 miles east.
How long does it take to go to your old neighborhood from where you are now, from like South Pass?
It might take like an hour.
Okay.
Driving.
So it's just to give people an idea of how far like that is that aren't from LA, because people like the size of LA to begin with is insane, right? And we can definitely get into that. But and you are a photographer, correct? You are you an artist that uses photography? How do you identify that I'm correct in addressing you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trained in photography. For sure. I got my undergrad in photo and imaging, and I worked commercially as a photographer, and then worked in a lab for a few years as a printer. So everything that I sort of do is sort of based in photography. But I would say I'm an artist that uses photography.
And in that sense, like you're not doing documentary style, like you're not like a Robert Frank, right? I mean, I've obviously seen some of the work. I'm just trying to give people an idea of who my guest is before we get into your topic. So like that, right? Like you're not, I mean, not that you're like Ansel Adams either, but like maybe more in the vein of like the, you're not one of those like, you know how in the 70s photographers were like, we show the whole frame, you know. You're not purist like that. You're like somebody who uses it as a tool.
Yeah, definitely somebody who uses it as a tool, and I think I like to think that I really push back against any sort of purist concept of photography. I like to think that, but we'll see.
Do you find that a lot of your teachers were boomers or Gen Xers? Okay, I can see why that would be.
Yeah.
Because that's literally the generation that we're talking about that was like, we're going to show the whole frame. And for those that don't know what I'm talking about, like there's a period in photography where you can like see, there's like a black border around the image, because they're not like, they want you to see that they're not cropping it at all, right? That it was just taken in the moment. And like, it's in terms of parameters, it's a helpful one, I'm sure, right? Like, but it's also valid to be interested in other things that photography.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like, I still find problems with that. Like even if you're, that edge is called the rebate edge, and even if you're printing, the rebate edge, you still crop the world through the viewfinder. right?
Yeah.
You've still made a decision compositionally. So I always think about
I think that the motivation behind it was, or my understanding of it is that the motivation was to show you that, like, just to sort of isolate the crop, like, you know, the artistic moment to the actual image capturing part rather than the printing, right? Like, but so I mean, I think that it's just interesting how these movements develop, right? Like, I think that we're also in a time where, you know, you mentioned that you did your BFA with Josh Shadle, and, like, I mean, the stuff that he's doing is pretty relevant because he just prints vinyl, you know, and like puts it on walls and puts it on doors and stuff, and that's how we consume a lot of photography. So it's an interesting evolution. Like, I don't think I understand. Like, I would say that's like, it makes sense how things evolve, right? Like, you want to be a purist at first, and then you're like, well, it's kind of like the Clement Greenberg thing in painting, right? But anyway,
exactly. Yeah.
So do you have any other thoughts on photography before we? I mean, unless I'm basically going to introduce the topic now. If you want to do that.
Yeah, let's do it.
So
I'm sure we'll touch on all of that, anyways.
Okay, so sometimes it's completely unrelated to the work. Sometimes it's related to the practice. So, what's the topic?
Yeah, I just worked on I'm in my second year at UC Irvine right now. And we just had a group show with my cohort. And so when that group show, I showed a series of works that I've been making for the last year or so, that, you know, if I, you know, sort of start backwards a little bit, you know, the work itself was about, it was photographs of cracks and damage on asphalt, but like a really small section that essentially, I'll talk about the process later, but I made bigger. And, you know, it really is sort of like got me thinking about like use value in asphalt, or, you know, value? Use value, like what's
news? Like
use, like what?
USE. Okay, sorry.
yeah.
It's like, you know, like it's the Zoom. It's not like that. Your pronunciation. It's just like it gets garbled up for me. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. I know. I get that. Use value in the street, and I sort of like, you know, every time I think of, when I'm like talking about the work, I like always kind of have to like rely a little bit on these like anecdotes, you know, like sort of autobiographical anecdotes.
That's really good for podcasting, so go for it.
Okay, cool. So perfect. Yeah. I think so. That makes it interesting. Yeah. So I mean, it sort of like goes back to, you know, we were talking about photography a second ago, or just, you know, purist or like even, you know, sort of like I thought a lot about like the ethics of like quote street photography. I had this sort of, you know, Instagram DM beef with a well-known photographer. I won't say his name, but
you can start beef, bro.
Dude, I'm all about it. I'm all about it. Yeah, maybe people can figure out who he is when I talk about it.
Okay. You're gonna have to tell me off air because I need to know everything about my guests. I need to get inside your brain and know who you hate.
For sure. I'll let it.
No, it's just mostly because it's gonna amuse the shit out of me if that person follows me, and then to see you on the promoted on my Instagram, like I'm gonna take a sick pleasure in that. I love even if it's my best friend, I'm just gonna be like, ha ha ha, because I'm a little bit like that. Anyway, go ahead. So tell me more about this Instagram beef, because this is getting juicy.
Yeah, it's juicy. So I had this, you know, it's this photographer who, you know, is a well-established, well-known photographer, having shows and everything, and you know, he uses his platform in a way that like he documents, right? Like the documentary photographer documenting his life, and he has this like specific thing that he does on his Instagram story, and you know, and it's like documenting a certain group of people. And so, you know, what I found with that was, you know, it's obviously there's problems with that, I felt like.
Yeah.
And most importantly, in my opinion, he had an image of a child on there on his Instagram story. And I'm like, that, you know, there was nothing wrong with the photo necessarily or whatever, but, you know, just the way that he chose to like portray this child on his Instagram story, I felt like a little bit like questioning him on that and like what the intention was behind that.
How did he portray him? Was the child looking pathetic? Were they angelic?
No, they were just, it was just like a little girl, like sitting on a bench, like in a dress, but her feet were up, or like something, you know, something.
Were you concerned about it being sexual?
Well, so that's what I was asking him. Like, what are you trying to do with this? Why did you take this photo? Why did, you know, he has 200,000 followers or some shit like that. So it's like, why did you choose to put this photo on your story for 200,000 people to look at? Right. Yeah. Like I just wanted to know. And so, you know, it went back and forth, and essentially, you know, he came back. Where we landed in this discussion, he started getting really upset with me because I think I was asking certain questions that became a little difficult to answer, you know, and basically what it came down to was like, his opinion was his favorite photographers were street photographers, and technically what he's doing is not illegal. So because it's not illegal, it's okay to do. Where in my mind, you know, I think I hear that and I just hear like a lot of privilege, like, oh, because you can, you know, he's like, older white man, you know, and he's doing this thing and nobody's questioning him. And people are buying his prints or whatever. And he's like sort of hiding behind this, this veil of like, it's not illegal, so I can continue to do this.
Yeah, anytime you're saying it's not illegal and that's your first offense.
Yeah. Right.
And it's interesting because so there's some stuff to parse there that I think that we'll probably agree on overall, because it is interesting. I do think that there is a valid discussion about like privilege in terms of street photography, because there is living where we live right now, living in the times that we live right now, it's very easy, it's very present in our minds to notice that the idea that if you are unhoused, like, right? If you do, and you include that in street photography, I think that I've had discussions and I can see instances where it, like, for example, I don't think that like Lee Freelander and the Farms Administration, like that was a government project to educate people on the extent of the poverty. And I'm not even, I mean, Freelander is sort of a street photographer sometimes, but in this context, you know, like his most famous stuff. Then you also have the situations where you have I forget who it was, but someone brought, I think it was Zenia Baltaji, who was on the show, who talked about how the photographer that took that famous photograph of the Afghani woman who had like really shocking eyes, like beautiful eyes, you know, like how he became super famous and she just ended up continuing. So like there is definitely an issue with, or maybe that was Michelle Lisa that brought that up. I it's been a lot of episodes, but you know, I think that if we're talking about someone like Robert Frank, right? Mm-hmm. He's also a street photographer, but he's documenting something like he was an immigrant from another country who had escaped the fun war, let's call it.
Yeah.
And so the context there, as an outsider observing this place and taking those photographies, I think I understand the validity of that. That there is a legit documentation goes there. If you're talking about Robert Frank, he's taking pictures at the zoo when he's fucking depressed because he's divorced, and he's taking his kids to the zoo. You can maybe question the one about women. That was also like the one that he edited himself. I forget, but he's had some problems. I don't think that it was exploitative in the same way, because he's not taking pictures of fucking people that are destitute, right? He's taking that. I think that in that place, even there, the argument of legality, like, because if I start fucking making a book out of taking pictures of hot girls on the street, like in 2021, like how would you feel about that?
Right. I mean, I feel, I mean, if you're asking me how I feel about it, I feel like it's cheap. I feel like it's,
well, there's people that do that kind of shit, right? There's Instagram's accounts. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and
I'm not saying I don't look at those accounts. Okay. But, go ahead.
But to me, I would say that, like, I actually wouldn't even like differentiate what this guy has done with something like that kind of Instagram account. It's sort of just like taking whatever you want. It's like colonizing, right? It's just like taking, and just because you can like hide behind a thing saying, well, it's not illegal, so I'm going to take it. Right. And I really grappled with that idea for a while after having this argument with him about just like, man, just like that's that same mentality of like, it's mine now because I shot it. And we did like get into like with our conversation, we did get into like, well, did you ask this child's parents if you could post this photo?
That's the big fucking problem right there. Right. That's the hugest problem.
I bet you they wouldn't want their kid to be seen by 200,000 people in this way, which again, it wasn't a bad
They wouldn't
photograph.
want their kid photographed either,
Right, exactly.
As photographers, we have run into this where we have innocently taken photographs of kids, like just like, oh, this is a park, it looks nice, everybody's having fun, and they're like, and people confront you, and you know what? Fuck yeah, they're right.
Rightfully
like
so,
they have to protect,
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So. Yeah, no, that's like the base of it. So that got me thinking about, street photography. And, and after that, I just, I sort of went down, this was pre-COVID, 2019, like late 2019, and then COVID rolls in and, all of a sudden I lived in a tiny little studio apartment in Pomona, California,
familiar,
commuting to Irvine, and never had ever intended to spend any time in this apartment. I had intended to be in my studio in Irvine. And what ended up happening was when we shut down, all of a sudden my tiny studio apartment became my, living quarters, my classroom, my, studio, and so all of a sudden it wasn't enough, to be in there. So, I've been skateboarding since I was in fourth grade. I don't know how old you are, like 12, 11, something like that. And so I started just skating at this like high school about a mile away, just for exercise, but also just to get out of my apartment and whatever.
Now, not when you were in fourth grade.
Now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, or last year, during, the first few months of quarantine. And, so I was in this parking lot a lot. And I kind of try to think about this parking lot as maybe like a studio space, a makeshift studio space. And what I noticed was on the asphalt in the ground of the parking lot, there was these huge long stretches of like cracks in the asphalt, just huge. And they stretched out the entire parking lot. And, as a skater, when you're skating around, you're looking down at the ground so you don't fall.
So you don't just like nick one of those cracks and then go flying.
Yeah, I literally have a video where I was filming the crack and wasn't watching and I just tumbled. Yeah.
Or just something about
exactly.
This.
Yep. Exactly. You got it.
Like a grain of rice.
So that's where, so I started like thinking about these cracks. I started thinking about these like, what they sort of like, how they occurred in the ground. And I started photographing them just at night, like with an on-camera flash on my camera, just going around, like doing this like sort of like straight, topographic view of the cracks and
35 millimeter.
Digital 35.
Okay.
So
I had to clarify because you were a printer, so.
Well, and so we'll even, it gets juicy here in a second.
Oh,
so,
nice. So I love that that's our adjective now. I don't know how it happened, but that's a great adjective.
That's my favorite. I use it. I use it too much. So I was photographing these cracks. I started photographing other parts of the asphalt that just contained damage. And there was a section that had like all these like scrapes down it. And it also like sort of kicked up this memory of working, my dad is a wood finisher. And so before ever going to art school or anything, I was working construction with my dad my whole life.
Wood finishing is what? Describe it for me so that I have a clear idea. Because I mean,
it's like lacquering and staining wood.
Okay.
So like furniture, kitchen cabinets, anything that has wood.
No painting?
He does a little bit of painting, but it's usually like staining and lacquering and things like that.
It's also important how specialized that is, because he probably makes a very specific, like, anytime it's like being a doctor. If you're a surgeon, like I'm just saying, like that those things aren't celebrated enough. Those little like specializations, like, because people are just like construction. Like, no, your dad was a baller.
Yeah, totally. And he really, he would, we talk about him in this like sense that he's like a blue collar worker. And we talk about him in this idea that he is in construction, but also in reality, he's like really has like a real understanding of like color in a way that not a lot of people I feel like do.
And
but
like
he uses different words.
Yeah. Grains of wood.
He uses different, like he'll say like burnt sienna. And I'm like, what the hell is burnt sienna? But I see what he's doing there, when he's mixing these colors together, and I'm like, oh,
well,
okay,
if you were a painter, you may click with that more. So that's also interesting, right? Because actually the episode that's out this week about psychology of color, we talk about how like CMYK, like those color spaces, it's even psychologically those are different.
Exactly. So when I was growing up, we have this big box trailer that connects to his truck, and all the equipment goes in there. And there's a column that hangs down from the trailer. And so anytime my dad would drive over a peak in the ground, this thing scrapes across. So he's left all these scrapes all over Southern California with his trailer, and there's a sound, like this horrible like scraping sound that it makes. But when I was photographing, I was like, oh, scrapes, just like my dad's trailer, and I started thinking about the like indexical quality of what my dad does, of my dad in these different places. And
as a mark maker, essentially.
Exactly. And then like seeing like oil stains in the asphalt. There's another mark left by a person, by a vehicle. So I was just photographing a ton in this parking lot. I started filling the cracks with silicone and like, pulling, like, excavating them from the ground. And now I had like a cast of the cracks themselves with silicone.
That's dope. Are you photographing those, or are you presenting those?
I was in a group show earlier this year, and I did get a chance to present the actual sculpture. Okay. And what was awesome about it was that whatever was in the crack sort of stuck to the bottom side of it. So there's like a lot of, detritus from the parking lot, a lot of like human hair or gum wrappers or bugs or, buds from plants, and all this stuff that was just like sort of embedded into the sculpture when I, pulled it out and flipped it over. So
you're definitely an artist that uses photography then. If the way that you talk about detritus with like, it's amazing. It's like a fucking resource.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw a guitar at work now they're Kiesel guitars, but it's a company that makes custom guitars, and like the that shit must have cost the guy so much fucking money, but that thing was so disgusting, and my coworker was like, yeah, there's a lot of biology on that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, that's such a good way to just like describe that disgusting, like it's just random biology. Like
you're like, that's awesome, but also, yeah.
It's
Don't say biology.
Their trace behind, detritus, essentially. But
Detritus,
that's what that made me think of when you said that. But in that context, we were not appreciative of it. We were like, I have to hold this.
Yeah, exactly.
I had to wipe this down.
That's nasty, dude. So I was photographing these cracks, not really even sure like what I was doing, or not. It extended beyond the cracks. It just became about the damage, the mark making in the asphalts. So basically once, things opened up just enough that I could get back onto campus. We at UCI, it's pretty special. We have a dark room there for mural printing. Mural printing. So it's one room dedicated to this one giant enlarger that's on a track that projects on the wall.
How big and wide does it print?
I made 40 by 60 prints, but it goes much bigger than that. It basically however big you can get something up on the wall.
It projects on a wall, and then however big the room lets you back up?
Exactly, and it's on track, so it goes way back. So it could potentially cover the entire wall. How the fuck do you get that
paper up there without like creasing the shit out of it, dude?
Oh man, so that's
how many? It's like 60 people putting that shit up. It's a good thing you're a printer.
Yeah, exactly. So what I did was, I had these digital files. Normally I like to work with film when possible, but I'm not, like, going back to that purist conversation. I am not a purist at all. I'll shoot any camera, whatever.
I'm not a purist either. I'm a pragmatist, and when I learned especially when I was learning digital photography, it was such a pain in the ass. I'm sure it's amazing right now. We had just gotten genuine fractals.
Yeah, exactly.
Like at 2.0.
Exactly. You know what I'm talking about then. So like, and I think back to like even that idea of like, using the correct tools for whatever job that it is that you're doing. And sometimes it's the digital camera, and, the digital cameras now, the one that I was using is a 45 megapixel mirrorless camera. I can make a 40 by 60 inch print, no problem with it.
Yeah.
So what I did was, I took the digital files and I printed, I brought them into Photoshop, flipped them, inverted them into a negative, and then outputted them, inkjet printed them on a clear material, clear substrate, so that it was a big giant, 40 by 60 inch negative. Mm-hmm. And then I took the negative into the mural print darkroom and then made a contact print with the
print. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. With the on fiber paper.
And for non-photographers, contact print means that it's basically a one-to-one transfer. There's no enlarging. There's no like loss of information. There's no like. So wait. So okay. So what I mean, like, actually, I'm kind of a layman in this situation because, like I said, I kind of abandoned photography. There's a couple of things that are interesting in the way that you're talking about it and your practice right now that I relate to, because I think that there's a thing that when you start with photography and you turn out to be an artist, right? Instead of being like a straight photographer, there is, I just realized, do you feel comfortable taking off your cap? Because I can't see your face at all. Or the light, like it's just casting a shadow. Anyway, sorry. No. Yeah. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, you are a photographer. You just like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so things that you've said that I identify with in terms of my practice. I think that there is like an analytical, basically, like, just skipping ahead, there's an analytical quality that I think learning photography, it is a very specific tool. And at some point you have to decide if you're going to be of the discipline and, like, for lack of a better word, purist. You know, like there's photography in the sense of like documentary photography, and that is a tradition that I think is valid. You know, like it may be antiquated because now with like deep fakes and all that bullshit, like it's the conversation. That's what's interesting about photography. The conversation as technology evolves keeps evolving, and that's why we get into a space where like the things that the people were doing in the 70s is no longer valid, and it's actually more relevant things that like you and Josh Shadle are doing. They still are valid photography, even though it's art as photography or artists implementing photography as a tool. Like specifically, you know, not to like. It's been a while, and I've seen his work evolve, and he talked about it on the show about his interest in how these in how much we've changed the way that we consume photography, right? Yeah. Like, and that is going back to the way of define, like that's like it's like the ongoing Clement Greenberg versus Frank Stella for painters, right? You understand what I'm saying there? Like it's like for laymen or for novices or people that don't know, Clement Greenberg was saying that the surface had to be like painting had to be flat because that's the surface, and to create illusion is the blah blah blah, like, you know, betray it. And then so Frank Stella took it a step further, and he started incorporating the stretcher of the canvas in the painting, and and then remade painting objects, right? Like which is essentially kind of similar to what I think the area that you, me, and I mean, Josh is a lot more photography based. I think that even like I think his parameter is very much about, like, I think you and I are a lot more mark makers in a sense. You get what I'm saying? Like, does that, I mean, I know that you don't know my work, but I like, if what I'm saying, does what I'm describing you as make sense, right? Yeah,
totally.
And then and so I think it's really interesting, but I think that what the three of us have in common is a conceptual base, and I think that comes with the parameters of photography, right? Like photographs are not like painting; they're not like and in the sense. Photography kind of teaches us about the limitations of other media, because it can do certain things and it can't do certain things, and it's closely related to things like film. But film is a narrative form, and as Jack Kerouac said in his foreword of Robert Frank's book, you're laughing because I know you just probably recently read it.
yeah, exactly. No, I mean, you know. Oh, go ahead, finish it.
Oh no, so basically, what Jack Kerouac says is that photography is to poetry as film is to novels, or you know, like I mean, that's a paraphrase and butchered because he's Jack Kerouac, and even though I kind of agree with what's his name, the true crime writer, that's not writing, that's typing. I kind of agree with some of that critique of his, but there you go. It's like artists have this whole, like, you know, different approach to things. Anyway, it makes sense that Jack Kerouac would notice that about photography based on the narrative thing that what is the guy they made a whole movie about him. Anyway, go ahead. If you're not you're not gonna get it if you don't know true crime.
I don't know.
Don't worry.
You're not talking about Capote.
Say what? Yeah, Capote. Yes, you did.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I figured you were talking about. Yeah. You know, what I would say, you know, I kind of laughed about the Kerouac thing is, you know, because I guess like when, you know, pulling, obviously, like we were talking about my process and about like literally what you know, the thing that's on the wall. But if I pull back a little bit, you know, what I'm thinking about right now is that, you know, the word street and like the sort of like different connotations that has, right? Or like, you know, the different ways in which it exists, right? So it's like, you could be a person from the streets. You could be, you know, shooting street photography. You could be using the street as a means to, traverse over with a vehicle. You could be, unhoused people live there. So it's like all these different sort of like values that street has, and even like, thinking about it in a way that like that, this, when you lay that asphalt down, right, or concrete or whatever, when you lay that down, that's that transformation from like natural space into urban space.
Actually, you just made me think of something really interesting, because I had somebody that was from the Midwest, and she described as a landscape photographer. And I understand that there is a difference in terms of landscape, but her name is Kale, and she was documenting the like what was left after, essentially, I mean, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I'm going to describe it as like what happened to the Midwest after NAFTA, right? Like it just got hollowed out, right? And so, but that is somehow related. And what makes, what you made me think about is the street as a context, right? Like street essentially is just a stage. And you can like what you're doing is documenting the stage directly, right? Because it is obviously a lot more interesting than a theater stage, right? Like you would have to be a fucking theater nerd to care about that. But everybody walks that stage. Everybody walks those parking lots, especially out here in the US, right? And they don't have no fancy cobblestones like where I grew up, right? Like it's fucking, it's just like, so that's really interesting. And I think that what you were saying about, like, I think that's why there is some of Robert Frank's work that is valid. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say the worst. I mean, I know you said that for you it's sort of equivalent, but I do think that like taking photographs of women in the oh no, actually you didn't compare it to, you said towards the Instagram account. So I don't want to misrepresent what you said. Let me correct that. So yeah, no. I form my thoughts out loud.
Nice.
So
I like it.
Okay. So the idea of like, I forget what, like, it was basically what Robert Frank did was take a shit ton of photographs, right?
Yeah.
And I think in terms of like the process, if you're trying to document something, I don't necessarily think that unpublished photographs are evil, right? Like if you try something and you discard it, right, because you're trying to figure out what you're doing within this context. Yeah. But once you release something and once you post it, I think that you take responsibility for that shit. So within that context, let me start talking about this thing, because I also don't want to be like, you can't take pictures of this stuff. Like there has to be a way. There has to be a way that we can agree that there is value being given to us as an audience, and value and in the sense of that farm subsidies, FSA, whatever the fuck, what the FSA?
Yep, FSA, Farm Security Administration.
Thank you. You're still in school, so you remember that.
Actually, I teach history of photography. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a whole.
That was my favorite. Like seriously, that is where I learned the most about American history. So yeah. Anyway, point being that like there has to be a way to document this stuff. I'm not against street photography as a whole, but I think, like you said, the importance is you get to crop out the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure homeless people have like had bad times on the places that you like. It's a fucking parking lot. Statistically, in Los Angeles, there's no way.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
I mean, I think, it's not even, I wouldn't even say like that I'm all for like the street photographer, really.
Oh, I wasn't like responding to your position. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I just mean like for myself, it's like, when I guess the thing, especially like as a young photographer or somebody, I really believe in this like idea of like the camera being like the way you sort of like can experience a place or the world or, you know what I mean? Like that, again, going back to like being a skater or something, it's like you have your all these kids are documenting themselves skating and like all that, that's an interaction with the urban space that, and they're redefining it for themselves, right, as obstacles or something, so there's like a really valid way, I think, of like using the camera and thinking about the camera in this space. My main issue was this person in particular.
Oh, no, I agree with you on that. Yeah.
In the like, not just like their Instagram story, but like there's deep problems with what they do. It's
exploitative.
It's bad. It's very bad. And they built an entire career off of it. And my thing is like, there's so many of us out there in the world that could really use that gallery representation or that show or what, all the things that this person is sort of like getting from this. And that also is maybe not so much about that person as it is about the people who support this person or the institutions that hold this person up or enable them to continue to do what they do, which
How
is,
old are you?
37.
37.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're about the same age. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's valid. I'm just curious. No, because you said young photographer, and I'm like, I guess.
Oh, no, not me. I'm not the young photographer. I'm
this
the old guy.
Well, yeah, no, and I think that's really interesting because it goes, it goes to that thing of like, unfortunately, the pinnacle of like reaching success is getting validation from people that maybe we don't agree with politically.
Yeah.
Because that's where the source of money comes from.
Totally
So in terms of like, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's not a meritocracy, and there is some really gauche things that are like, and so what is interesting about that stuff being elevated is this idea that like these people are the people that are supporting that and elevating it and funding it and giving it space are people that don't have access to this, try to avoid this, and so it ends up, it's almost like they're doing that National Geographic thing of like, look at these poor people with this, distended bellies because they have tapeworms and all that shit. Like, unfortunately I can't remember the only Susan Summers ad I can remember. I know she had two. It was like, do you want to make more money? Sure, we all do. But she also had one about like, adopting. You remember this, right? Like growing up.
No, I don't. This is all news to me. Yeah.
Maybe it's not Suzanne Summers. There was a celebrity that did. Okay. For people that are millennials, I'm gonna say, can you remember the "In the Arms of an Angel"?
Oh yeah.
So it was like that, but with black people that were starving in Ethiopia. So to me, there may be an element where like the audience for that, right? I'm definitely thinking a lot about audiences now that I'm fucking committing full time to doing this, right?
Yeah,
to
you
doing
are.
This podcast. It's like the audience, like what audience are, because I'm actually a huge fan of some really sophisticated streamers like this Code Miko. But then at the same time, her whole like audience is simps, is what they call them, which is like just like, I mean, I say that because I'm essentially a boomer, or I'm a Gen Xer. I'm one generation away.
Yeah,
but
you're one.
But for
you're
the context,
one in the middle. Yeah,
for the context, right? But yeah, like there's really like it really is a thing of like and then you also have like, man, picking your audience and having integrity and then pursuing money, it can be a tricky fucking thing, right? Like I'm definitely challenged with that because I don't want to do advertising for this show. But the longer I do this and don't make any fucking money, the more capitalism is like, why am I working so hard?
Well, it's true. And it is, I definitely feel like my view on it is like if there is advertising money out there, like, maybe should go to you because of the, to sustain this thing.
I get you, but what is it going to do to me?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. And that goes to like the people, like it's hard. It's a really hard, and now we're just getting into something that I think we both relate to. It's really hard to do art that is like, it's almost like you kind of have to trick people to be into it and sort of like not be bummed about it, but also like be like elated, I think like I definitely want people to I want people to relate to shit and then like have a moment of reflection. I don't want them to go in like, yeah, but the world sucks, sort of like I would rather them like be like, yo, it's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, or just like a question, question it, you know what I mean? And I think, photography really allows you that ability to question. I mean, I think it's bad if you feel like you already have the answers before as you're going in, like
say that again.
Like if you feel like you already have the answers to everything, then there would be no reason for you to like take a camera out into the world or something like that. But yeah, I agree with you. It's tricky. I mean, I've been like teaching photography too since 2016, and I run into that often. It's just like like how to just sort of like keep the enthusiasm up as you're like sort of like thinking to yourself like what the hell is this all for?
But you know what? Actually, that class changed me. I had a really good teacher. His name was Bill McGuire. He was my teacher. He's still around. I hope.
Hey, Bill.
But he knew Gary Winogrand and he knew he knew Lee Friedlander, and he was an OG. And actually, like big ups to him, because I was okay. This ties in nicely because that's where you got me going. So there's a cynicism that comes with observation. There really is, but there's also like a joy in experiencing, right? Where you're like, and I haven't really shot photographs in years, but I know like this, it's such a core thing of like, it's behind my practice. It has to do with like the way that I look at things. Right. So there's a fun in it. And there's something that makes you feel like, being alive is worth it despite how upsetting it is. But I feel like, so like one of my things about art history and why I think art history is important, and with all its problems, it's agreed upon fiction and all that. But essentially, when you start actually looking at the stuff that comes from a certain period, it's almost like when you look at tattoos that people have from like a certain decade, like, like no one was that original. Like, I mean, I'm not shitting on like, like no one does tribal anymore. But there's a generation of tribal tattoos out there. Yeah. No one's going to do those like indie pop, like triangles, but, forever, but they're going to, or I mean, like triangles, I understand is a charged word. I meant diamonds. Apologies to the triangle community. But like those little like stick and poke that are popular now, like that shit is going to be dated. Those
are referred to as Pinterest tattoos.
What's that?
Pinterest tattoos.
Pinterest tattoos. Okay.
Yeah, my partner is a tattooer, and she just graduated from USC's MFA program, and so we're always constantly having this discussion about tattoos. Yeah.
So, but you get what I'm saying? Like there is a zeitgeist to that, absolutely. even that, and then so I think with art history, despite it being the whitest motherfuckers and the malest motherfuckers and the cisest motherfuckers, like at some point there is still some relevance to the history, and you can correlate it to the history written by the whitest motherfuckers, the dominant motherfuckers, like the menaced motherfuckers that are writing the actual history. So I think it's like an emotional record. And when you start to get photography in there, it's going to be interesting how shit changes, right? Like, because it is an ever evolving medium. It's not, like every time we think we know what it is, we don't. Like it doesn't, and there's always room. Like it you know, like any other artwork, it you know, like I always say that painting is really romantic. You can't help it.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like photography, it's its own thing where it's like it has an inherent, it's observative, but it has an inherent sterility to it and detachment as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think, you know, I think like the amount of photography that we consume anymore is just adding to that, right? Like, I mean, like, I remember hearing about this statistic of like how many, and I don't know the statistics, so I probably shouldn't even bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up anyways.
That's the show, bro.
Okay, good. But like how many photographs somebody would actually see in a day in like the 60s, and how many photographs people would see in the 40s, 30s, you know, obviously photography was invented in 1839, but like, you know, like it wasn't common to see a photograph. It was like a thing, like, you know, and just now, like over time, now we just like eat it up. We just consume it, consume, you know, like it's nothing anymore. You know, or maybe that's not right. It's just something different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even when I was studying history of photography, I can't imagine what it must be like for you to describe this. Oh, okay. Also with cynicism. Anyway,
yeah.
Like there's no really way to quantify how much that consumption of photography has increased, and the whole point of my history of photography class was to instill in my brain how much these images affect us, right? Like one of the things that like, and it may seem silly, but it actually is, when you're asked the question, like my teacher, Bill McGuire again, he lifted up a piece of paper and a magazine, and he said, "What's this?" And then people were like, "It's a car." Right? Because it was like one of those like luxury cars, like supercar things, right? And people were like, "Oh no," and people gave more specific answers, blah blah blah. And then eventually he stopped it and he was like, "No, it's a photograph of a fucking car. Like that's what it is. It's not a car, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's a photograph of a car." And I think there is something profound that happens to us mentally like that, you know, like we're like seeing some, you know, like we watch movies and we fucking sit on the edge of our seats because like, you know, The Rock is about to fall off a cliff or some shit, or, you know, they're all taking a big safe through all of like downtown Brazil and kill a million people. I don't know if you've seen Fast Five, but that shit was awesome.
No, it sounds good. Sounds good.
I want to take you and Josh Shadle to watch that shit and see what what thoughts you guys have.
Yeah. We're down, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually like, when I think about history of photography too, I've only taught history of photography twice now. But I basically tried to unwhiten it as much as possible. Because there's really rich histories of the photographic practice in other parts of the world. And we don't learn about that. We learn only about the like sort of canon of photography.
I'm just hearing about this now. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So like, and I'm half Japanese. And so, not because of I'm half Japanese, but I have a very, here, let me back that up. Like my mom was born and raised in Japan and met my father, like, in her early 20s. So even though she's lived here now in America longer than she lived in Japan, her ability to speak English is not super great. And though I do speak Japanese, my ability to speak Japanese is not super great. So we do have it, like when we do converse, we have this sort of like broken, link. And I'm close with my mother. I'm close with her. So that's all to say, like, these past few years, I've like really taken an interest in like photography in Japan, because there is this, it's like I really understand the new topographics. I really get it.
What's that? New topographics? What does that mean?
It was like it was a movement in photography where this group of photographers was interested in that sort of man-altered landscape. Louis Baltz was one of them. Robert Adams was one. It's like this it's a very American sort of like view of the West. In like a lot of like track homes, in the 70s, and
Robert
just
Adams. The name rang a bell. Okay, when you said track homes, you just brought me back. That was I wrote papers on him. Yeah. I'm a big Robert Adams fan. Okay, thank you. You gave me access to a memory that I hadn't had, and it just like the serotonin was just like so delicious. So thank you.
Yeah. So, but we learn, Robert Frank, Winogrand, Freelander. We learn about all these people, but there's this crazy rich history of photography in Japan, especially. So there was this specific era that I'm like really interested in, which is late 60s, early 70s. There was a magazine.
It makes perfect sense because of the film that was coming out of there too. So go ahead.
Yeah. Exactly. No, so it goes. So even the film, like you're probably talking about like there's literature too. So like Abe Kobo was writing like novels that got turned into film. That sort of like there's a direct link through that, even like through this movement called Monoha and Butai art. Which was
I'm a basic person, so I thought I was thinking Kurosawa, but go ahead. You just
Kurosawa is. I mean,
no. That's where I was going. I'm just letting you know how basic my knowledge of this is, so you can keep going. Go.
I mean, Kurosawa is where you like definitely.
Yeah, it's a starting point. And then you skip ahead to Takeshi Miike, and that's where I'm at. So
where you're at.
Fill it in for me.
So like I would say, like if you're going down film, like you would check out like
stick with the photography.
But it all links together. So Teshigahara is the person that made a bunch of films in this era. That Abe Kobo wrote the book, and then Teshigahara made the films. But it's all sort of this like pushback against the, in that era, especially, it was sort of like the post-war Japan, American occupied Japan, right? So there was all of a sudden this just massive industrialization of Japan, urbanization of Japan. So it was like this, and getting back into the photography, it's like, there was this magazine called Provoke that these photographers were specifically looking at the mass urbanization of Japan, looking at the sort of like the residual effects of American occupation in Japan. There was a bunch of student protests in '68, which kind of mirror like the protests that were happening in America. It was, in this Provoke era of photography, it's like, it was definitely, landscape photography, but done in such a different way and understood in such a different way than say like Robert Adams or Louis Baltz or, the way the sort of Western eye. It was like this other history. But would
you describe the Robert Adams as a more suburban, whereas because you said the Japanese stuff is more urban, so I'm imagining stuff on top of each other.
There is that, but
vertical building or no? Okay, explain it to me.
There is that, but like it was more conceptual too. Like I would say like there's this series that like really just like. I still think about it. I'm still thinking about it. And I'm like, man, that's so brilliant. But like this one photographer, Takuma Nakahira, would take the last train in Japan, in Tokyo every night and photograph on the last train. And what he would do is keep the shutter open. You know, to be able to photograph in a train, you'd have to keep the shutter open in order to just get enough light in there to expose your film, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is, yeah, exactly.
Probably not as well.
Well, I mean, it's just different. But like, what happens is the movement of the train, right, go onto the piece of film.
I've done
that. Right? And then so what you have now is you have the landscape recorded onto the piece of film, right? So now you have like the urban space, you have like exactly what he was photographing inside the train, but now you also have this like sort of undercurrent of like the movement of the train itself because of the way that the way that the tracks are laid down on the ground or whatever. Yeah, go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, I was just gonna say that I probably it sounds different. No, you just triggered like a fun remembrance of like just sitting and shooting. Like that's I was like, oh, I did that. It was so much fun. That was basically like, and what's cool about that there is something about like sitting on a train and you know. I don't know how many he took. I don't know what his editing process is, but there is something so much fun about just like sitting there and just opening your shutter and just like let's let some light in, you know, and see how that goes, and then you have some kind of understanding of how to do it, right? But it's a little bit trial and error. That shit's amazing, and when you fucking nail it, it's just so satisfying. You know, like, oh man, I kind of want to go. I kind of want to shoot film again. Can you do that kind of shit on digital now? Like, you used to not be able to, really.
Yeah, I mean, digital's come a long way, man.
Okay,
So like,
it's been a decade.
Or in a decade, it definitely in 2 decades, it's come a long way. But even in this, like, you know, we have like like mirrorless cameras, right? So now there's cameras that don't even have moving parts in them. And they do incredibly well in low light.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, again, that's like changing the whole sort of like way that we're going to like start perceiving even low light, right? Like we're going to start seeing in the dark, you know, and like,
I'm going to have to consult with you guys because I am going to eventually need a new camera for shooting in studio. So be aware that I will be hitting you up because I'm waiting for it. You know, like it's almost like serendipitous that I was like, fuck this. Let Hiroshi learn how to do this, and I'll ask him in 20 years.
There you go, man.
But this conversation is definitely getting me hungry for it. You know, like just like think that, you know, it's the process of shooting photographs that I think I really love. You know.
Yeah.
So like I mean, not that it was anywhere near as good or as effective, but I definitely did shoot in, like, there was a period where I was shooting in, there was like a train in Paris. And so the shot was interesting because it was, instead of having like cars that, you know, like with doors that you would go into the next car and all of that.
Right.
It was just an open train with like, kind of like an accordion sort of vibe thing that like flexes as it turns, that was connecting each car, and it was just open the whole way down. And I just remember having so much fun just sitting there with a tripod, taking a frame and watching the train turn corners, you know, and then what you end up with this like crisp first car and this portal that's all watery and shit. Like, dude, even if the pictures didn't come out great and they weren't like something that you would want to share, like, you know, because aesthetically there was like, you know, one thing that it's just so much fun to just see how light behaves on that shit. So I totally, I'm definitely like, I'm feeling the vibe after talking to you.
Great.
You know, like it's different to have an iPhone. I really want to go out and shoot. So
yeah, I mean, and I love, like I have several different cameras at this point, and I just love the, like, even just the different way. Even considering my iPhone as a camera, right? Like there's a way that you shoot with your iPhone, right? Like you're looking at the back of your phone and you're like, you know, like this. I saw a talk with Stephen Shore once. Mm-hmm. Stephen Shore, was it? I want to say it was. But he was talking about how he liked taking pictures with his iPad because it was like looking at the back of an 8x10,
Yeah,
you know, an 8x10 camera. I'm like, oh my God, like that's so funny. And like, just to think about like composing in this kind of way, even with an iPad, you know, or like my, you know, I like, I have a RZ, which
RZ?
is a medium format camera, but you look down into it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so
Like
it's
a
like
Hasselblad and
Hasselblad, would be the other brand of it. But Hasselblad is a square. The RZ is a 6/7 frame, so it's still a rectangle. But it's like it's different, right? Like all of a sudden you're composing like this instead of like this instead, you know, or like on
Actually,
my
that's
4x5.
funny you say that because until I got Instagram, I had never really shot square format at all.
Yeah.
And that's like a trip, dude. Like my greatest regret is that while I was in school, the Fuji 6x9 was rented out the whole time, so that I couldn't use it.
That's a great camera.
Yeah, but I still have fantasies, so maybe that's where I'm going. The other problem is that I have decades old rolls of film that I just couldn't afford to at the time, and eventually I just realized that they're all bad. But like I'm not gonna throw those away. Maybe someday I'll be able to salvage them somehow. But like all the colors are
to do with it.
Yeah.
But you know, just go. You go into that knowing that.
Yeah, no, and I what's it called? I do rent Photoshop now, so I'm back. I'm back in the digital game, baby.
You rent Photoshop. I love it. And
that's how you do it now.
Yeah, exactly. You click and subscribe, right?
Yeah, it's a subscription service, so that you don't pirate their shit, and they make it $9 an hour. Like it's amazing how everything, dude. Even the repost app on Instagram, that shit was like I paid $5, and now they're like you need to subscribe $5 a month. I'm like fuck you, I paid for this already. God damn you!
Unbelievable.
Yeah, dude. Capitalism. It's all those terms and services that you never read.
It's all there, dude.
Yeah.
Who's reading that? I want to know who's reading all that.
It's like firstborn. All right, man. Okay, so we can keep talking shit, but I definitely want to let you go, and I really appreciate. I mean, we also feel like we've hit a nice round time. I definitely want to have you back. I'm starting to have return guests, so
great.
Probably in like 6 or so months, I'll hit you up again. But what's it called? Do you have anything that you want to promote and stuff?
No.
What's your Instagram?
It's Hiroshi Desu, so it's HIROSHI _DESU, then 2 underscores after that.
Okay, and I'm guessing that if you go on to Hiroshi Clark or search Hiroshi Clark, you might be one of them. I don't know how many Hiroshi Clarks there are. There's probably a lot.
No, there used to only be me, but some guys started a clothing company in LA called Hiro Clark. And I'm like, come on, man. What are you talking about?
Dude, you'd be surprised. At my job, I have to sometimes I basically have to take people's information to keep track of their receipts on our system. And sometimes it's like name I've never heard before. 20 of them, you know?
Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah.
So all right, and if anything, you will when the episode comes out, you'll be on our Instagram. So I'll definitely link to you.
Great.
Any movies that you want to recommend? Because it actually seems like you have some stuff.
Yeah, dude.
You want to recap some of the stuff you mentioned and maybe drop some that you haven't.
Yeah, I mean, movies I want to recommend. I mean, any movies?
No, I mean in terms of like what we were talking about. Yeah, if you want to recommend like the Avengers, that's fine too. But
no, I mean I would say like any Teshigahara films that you can get your hands on are great. His sort of like masterpiece was Woman in the Dunes.
Okay.
That's incredible. Another one is called Crazed Fruit. These are all sort of like if you have like the Criterion Channel app or something, you can get them. But yeah, those are on pretty solid repeat in my life. So. Yeah.
And my basic B recommendations are going to be. So we talked about Takeshi Miike in the in the Giallo movies, the horror movie one, but we never talked about one of my favorite ones. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna say go watch Seven Samurai, and then go watch 13 Samurai. And I think those both movies are very tightly related in this really interesting way. One is obviously an homage to the other, but both kick fucking ass, and they are nothing alike.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Toshido Mifune, man, that guy is the actor in the Seven Samurai. It's incredible.
He's Yojimbo, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And the one that there's one that is like that I never got to, which is a corporate saga in Japan, and I like that Kurosawa did. I forget what it's called, but man, that's one that I definitely want to like. I mean, it's been a while since I've been reading movies, so I have to get back into that habit. Yeah. But that shit seems appealing because it's probably just a corporate samurai movie, and I'm like, yeah, I work for a corporation. I can relate.
Yeah, totally, exactly.
All right, man. Yeah. It's been a real pleasure. I'm glad that we got around to doing it, and actually, I totally appreciate why you had to reschedule. That show looked awesome, so congratulations on that. That's definitely, I definitely remember that. That's what, and when it popped up, I was like, oh yeah. This is definitely one of the best cancellations I've ever had. I'm not calling out anybody, but shit happens, and like sometimes you're like, oh, I see the results. You don't always get to see when someone dies.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Not that anyone's canceled
so much.
over a death. Yeah, and it's still up. So is it right?
It came down last week. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
It's all good.
But there's pictures
it'll go
up
again soon someday.
Yeah, there's pictures up, and you can see that. Thank you so much, and goodbye to the listeners.